All right, guys, welcome. This is wealthcurated.com. We're going full auto today with the highly esteemed Mr. Hugo Eccles. And it's an interesting story that we're going to talk about. And the background is really interesting. So, Hugo, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
You have quite a background in industrial design, lots of digits and initials behind your name and stuff you've done, and done a lot of cool work with so many different entities. And of course, pedigree schooling and the design world and all that kind of stuff. But you've worked with Ducati, Triumph, Yamaha, Zero, AT&T. There's hardly a company that has great optics and design that you have not worked for. So tell us a little bit about that background before we jump into the motorbike stuff. Then I'll kind of ask you what brought you to motorbikes of all things.
Okay, right. So I'll bury the lead a little bit on the other story.
Yeah.
So my background, like you said, is industrial design. I studied at the Royal College of Art and then pursued a relatively traditional sort of agency career, worked at IDEO in London, and then had my own studio in London where we worked with companies like Nike and Honda, and then went back into the agency world again, sort of corporate agency world, and was design director at Fitch in the US, based out of Columbus, Ohio. Moved to New York, worked with a number of agencies there. Back to London in 2010 to work with Sir Terence Conran and a design agency called Native, and then came out to San Francisco in about 8 years ago.
Okay, well, that's a quick summary. I know there's a lot jam-packed in there, but all around really high-end projects and top-tier stuff. I see the board behind you, and a lot
real
of
real board.
Yeah, that's right. Real background there. I see chairs and different structures and stuff. Your design background, quite obviously, still influences your motorcycle design quite a bit. Yes.
Oh, very much so. So to kind of expand a bit on the industrial design. So in my agency career of 25 odd years, like you said, worked with AT&T, Amex, Virgin, Atlantic, British Airways. I mean, worked on everything from sort of cell phones to computer printers to laptops, sippy cups, medical products, car interiors, and although I've in some ways sort of shifted focus from a pure industrial design pursuit to automotive and motorcycle, I've really, all I did was really just transfer all those skills. So, there's a lot of sort of parallels with what I was doing in industrial design. So, for example, we did watches for Nike and Tag Heuer, but, there are very similar sensibilities when you're designing switchgear and or gauges for motorcycles. Consumer electronics translates into switchgear. I've designed for Italian furniture companies. Obviously, that's sort of upholstery and lighting and then and some tableware companies where it's much more sort of sculptural, which translates into doing more of the kind of bodywork elements. So so I think maybe slightly different from a lot of my contemporaries is I do have this industrial design background, which and I use the same kind of approach and the same rigor when I'm designing motorcycles. Really, I would definitely, throughout my career, I've always made the distinction between I'm a designer, not a stylist. Both are very valid things, but I think there's a different rationale behind being a designer versus just being a more of an aesthetic stylist.
Right. Yeah, and that certainly comes out in your builds for sure. You can see there's an awful lot of design infrastructure there beyond just aesthetics.
Well, I mean, I think because of my background, I'm basically just by habit, I always design for kind of production, even be it small batch or with a view to this might be scalable at some later point, or with some tweaks, we can engineer it for production. So I think that's different with a lot of custom bikes are just designed as like one-offs.
Right.
And some of my builds end up being just one-offs for private clients. And, the agreement is that we don't make another one for anyone else, but it's still with that sense of, also, motorcycles, people crash them. So there's very often a point where we want to upgrade a piece or replace a piece or,
Right.
So, so I think that's the kind of mentality I bring to it.
So fascinating background, lots of education, great projects under the belt, design mind. How did you make that leap? What drew you to really become the motorcycle designer guy?
Yeah. So my my sort of personal background is, my dad was a real petrol head. The first car I remember that we had was a Sunbeam Tiger, which is a small English car with a big American engine in it. It's sort of the precursor to the Cobra, actually, which is a similar, a small AC British car with a big American block in it. And my dad was an amateur racer. He used to commute. We lived in the countryside, so he used to commute to London on his motorcycle with sort of suit and tie underneath his sort of coveralls. So it was all very sort of James Bond to my tiny impressionable mind.
Right.
And actually, on a family perspective, we come from a long line of kind of engineers. So there's I've got a great grandfather who's was one of the founders of the Royal Automobile Club. I think he's known as he's actually got some stuff in the Science Museum in London.
Cool.
He was known as the grandfather of electricity, and in fact installed electric lighting in Buckingham Palace. And the story goes, had some sort of disagreement with Queen Victoria about the installation, and she punched him in the shoulder. So like there's all the other stories say she slapped him, but I think she punched him. So there's a real background there. But then me personally, I've ridden motorcycles as long as I've been a designer, but slightly embarrassingly, the two, I never considered kind of mixing the two, and it was only when my wife said, this might be a stupid question, but you love design and you love motorcycles. Have you thought about, I don't know, designing motorcycles? And, I really hadn't. Design was something, it was a job I did during the week, and motorcycling was the thing I kind of did at the weekend. And I think actually, probably a lesson to everyone, like, I think, I'd thought about it sort of idly. I had this sort of fantasy that I might go back to the Royal College of Art and this time, study vehicle design. And I think, what that boils down to was I was kind of waiting for permission. And I guess in a way, my wife's question kind of was permission. And then when we moved to San Francisco in 2014, I'd lived in the States before for about 12 years before or something. But I'd always been on a work visa. And my wife's Canadian, but has American parents. So she's got dual nationality. So I now have a green card, which means I don't have to have an adult job.
Right.
My visa is not attached to adult employment.
Right.
So it seemed like, and it's California, the center of like, custom scene.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, the planets are aligning. Let's go for it. Let's just try it for a couple of years and see if it works. And if it doesn't, I have another career I can fall back on. Right. And obviously, product development is very prevalent here in, San Francisco, Silicon Valley. Yeah. There's a ton of that. So, and so we decided to give it a whirl. And
okay. So how many years ago? How many years ago was that now?
I think 7 or 8.
Okay.
Seems to work out. It works out okay.
Okay, yeah. So a lot of cool stuff under the belt since then. We'll talk a little bit about some of your bikes, but I'm curious for your perspective on the bigger picture in the bike world, the custom world, the EV revolution. Of course, one of your bikes right now is at the Peterson Museum, which I just had the pleasure of seeing and filming not too long ago, the Electric Revolutionaries exhibition. Tell us a little bit about how that bike came to be and what your design ethos is for that bike.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll I'll drop a little Easter egg in there because I know you want to ask me about this other motorcycle as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, I started talking to Zero. I actually got to just test ride one of Zero's motorcycles, I think back in 2016, something like that. And I thought, this is really cool. You know, I mean, I think I'm not, you know, I'm not insulting anyone by saying, like, I think, you know, there was room for improvement with the early Zero models design wise. But I really like the platform. And so I basically, you know, started talking to them about, can we do a project together? And, you know, they were like, well, the time is not quite right, you know, talk to us in 6 months, you know. And so I just kept in touch. It's what one of the guys I ended up working with described as courteously persistent.
Right.
But and then after about 2 years of that, they said, oh, actually, we might have something for you. Can you come down to Scotts Valley, which is about an hour and a half south? It's near Santa Cruz, about an hour and a half south of San Francisco. We've got something we'd like to talk to you about. And I thought, oh, you know, it may be an iteration of what they've done before. So I wasn't really expecting much, but, you know, I'd signed a ton of NDAs and all that kind of stuff. And then they kind of took me into their development lab, and there was the prototype SRS, some 12, 18 months before they revealed it to the public.
Okay.
And they said, we've got this platform and we really like what you did with the Ducati Hyperscrambler.
Yeah.
Have at it. You know, no real brief per se.
Cool.
Just, I know, which is amazing. Well, you know,
Yeah.
amazing and terrifying simultaneously.
Sure.
You know, because actually designers are petrified of carte blanche. It's quite a frightening prospect. And yeah, and then we just started working, and, you know, and they were hugely supportive with technical assistance, because I could, you know, I could phone, there were a couple of guys I could phone up and just ask really stupid questions of, you know, and in some way, you know, being an industrial designer, you are, because industrial design goes across so many categories, you know, like I sort of alluded to, like healthcare, luxury goods, consumer electronics, et cetera, you know, industrial machinery. We're kind of real generalists, and in some way very ignorant about things. But I think that's a real attribute, because I don't know what the stupid questions are. You know, I don't know if a question is stupid or not, so I'll just ask it. So, you know, the long-suffering techs and engineers at Zero answered a lot of my, quote, stupid questions about, can we move this, can we move that, and can we take this off? No, you really have to keep that, you know, that sort of thing. And I was just really experimenting with pushing stuff around. And then this was 2019. Well, we started working end of 2018, but 2019 through 2019. And, you know, you could really feel the momentum building with EV, like 2020, like the 20s was going to be this thing. And I mean, you can feel it now in 2022. And to be honest, I think 22 is what 2020 should have been and would have been without the pandemic. And it was like, this is an amazing opportunity. I'm the first custom designer builder to be given an SRF in the world.
That's pretty cool.
Zero SRF. I know. I mean, and a huge honor, but then a huge amount of pressure, right? Like, don't fuck this up.
Yeah.
Maybe more pressure from me. I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
Crash it.
maybe their expectations are relatively low. Mine were high. And, you know, this is the first new propulsion technology we've had in 130 years. And as an industrial designer, I was like, I can't be building something that looks like a gas bike. You know, we have to do some proper first principles, ground up work of what should a design language, not the design language, I wouldn't be as presumptuous to say, but like, what would a proposed design language for electric look like? That almost like, how would you design a motorcycle if you could pretend that you'd never seen a gas bike? Like, proper first principles. And parallel to that, or alongside that, I started thinking about, and I started doing some research on electric. And, you know, we were so close to having an electric reality. You know, in 1900, there were twice as many electric vehicles on the road as there were gas vehicles. 1914, 1915, Henry Ford and Thomas Edison were going to start an electric car company. They even prototyped one using a Model T chassis. I mean, so, but for whatever reason, you know, oil lobby, et cetera, it just didn't happen. You know, our realities diverged. And I thought, why don't we go back to, again, sort of first principles at the beginning of this thing, 130 years ago, sort of 1890s or so. And imagine if you just kept developing electric motorcycles for 130 years, what would a 2019, 2020 motorcycle look like now? And imagine like there hadn't been, so it's really, you know, the XP, there was a challenge building the XP in so much that it's very difficult to present it as a futuristic motorcycle if you're using present day components and technology. The kind of sleight of hand was, it's not a futuristic motorcycle, it's actually a present day motorcycle, but from this parallel reality. So that's why it is simultaneously familiar and unfamiliar. You know, it's got some different elements in it. And actually what was quite fun was you could then, because it was an alternate present, you could invent some alternate past. So the XP was designed as actually an X-race bike that had been retrofitted for the road. So we didn't have time to implement it, but in the panels, we were going to ghost in these old race graphics, you know, almost like if you painted if you've got a white car, you put stickers all over it for 10 years. You know, the paint that's exposed to the sun sort of goes slightly cream. And then when you peel the stickers off in bright light, you can be like, oh my God, there's like a history there, you know. So that was kind of, unfortunately, like we ran out of time. I mean, there was just this mad rush to get the XP finished.
Interesting idea.
July 2019, we had to take it to Goodwood Festival of Speed.
Okay.
Which I'd been to as a audience member before, which is, I mean, if you've never been, or I would recommend it to anybody. It is, and I know this is a hugely overused phrase, but there is literally nothing like it in the world.
Wow.
You know, it's a big country mansion, huge grounds. You know, the grounds have like a horse racing track and a hill climb track, and they have an aerodrome, and there's fireworks every night. The Red Arrows, which are the kind of British equivalent of the Blue Angels, do a flyby every day. It's broadcast on the BBC and Sky. You have like F1 and ex Le Mans drivers driving these, I mean, unique vehicles. It's very incredible.
Cool.
And there's literally nothing else like it in the world.
We'll have to have that conversation, how we can collaborate to get over there for the next one.
Yeah, because it's just been this year, but well, there is a really good one as well called the Goodwood Revival, which is sort of pre-1960s cars, and everyone gets dressed up. But you can, if you make the effort to get dressed in period costume, you can walk into the pit, and you've got kind of Roger Waters, you know, 250 GT, which is worth God knows how many million. And then that car's out on the track trading paint with other cars that are worth millions of dollars.
That's amazing.
I mean, it's incredible. It really is.
That's amazing. So tell us about the Hyper Scrambler. The XP is maybe the latest that people are familiar with. The Hyper Scrambler, you know, is featured on Lino and other places, and also won awards at shows and festivals. Tell us about the design thought for I love the engine, by the way. It's so cool the way the engine's presented in the bike. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so the Hyper Scrambler project started with, there was actually, Ducati did a worldwide design competition called Custom Rumble. And I partnered with a local, so it was builders partnered with dealerships, and I partnered with a local dealership here in San Francisco called Marin Speed Shop, where it's slightly north of San Francisco, because I was good friends with the manager of that dealership, and it was to customize the then new Ducati Scrambler. And in fact, we had a real challenge finding one to like customize, because they're all sold out. But we got hold of one, and and the brief was just to customize it, and that was it. You know, it's a very open brief. I just assumed that everyone was going to really bring it, and so I guess I probably I overcompensated a bit, and ended up with this.
It's unlike any scrambler I've seen.
Oh yeah, and actually, even people with scramblers think it's based on something else. Usually, they think it's based on a hypermotor, but no, it's a scrambler frame. And so I started by stripping down the scrambler, and the scrambler underneath the tank and everything has this lovely tubular steel trellis frame. Absolutely kind of quintessentially Ducati. And in fact, the scrambler, I think, is the only Ducati left now that has a true trellis frame. The monsters have them, but they're kind of like, it's a sort of decorative element, really. And I was like, so having revealed that, I'm like, there's no way we can cover that back up again. And that, wanting to not cover that up, that kind of dictated the shape of the tank, this very narrow tank that sort of tapers towards the front. And then, I was designing the seat, and the seat was kind of this sort of straight thing, and it just looked really weird. And it was like, well, logically, it should carry on tapering outwards, following the line of the tank. So that's how the seat became like that. And then when I got around to the front, it was like, well, it's literally pointing to something being really narrow, and that's why it's got this very narrow vertical LED. So, maybe, I think as I've kind of matured as a designer, I really try to be less kind of dogmatic. So I really didn't have a set idea of what I was going to do with this scrambler. When I'm like, I'm going to strip it, and I want to see what it wants to be. And it's going to sound immensely pretentious, but it's and I'm no way equating my work to. Well, I think it was Rodin. I think said, that he kind of revealed the sculpture inside of the marble. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think sometimes you strip a bike, and then there's something it kind of wants to be. And then as for the motor, Ducatis have these beautiful L twins, and the scramblers an 800cc air-cooled. So air-cooled motors are lovely, right? Because they're covered in fins. They don't have all the cooling ducts and pipes and radiators and stuff like that. And so I just really stripped a ton of stuff off it, put a clear clutch cover on it as a kind of nod to scramblers actually now have wet clutches, but as a nod to kind of the exposed dry clutches of former Ducatis.
Is it an actual clutch?
Well, it's a sort of splash clutch.
Okay.
You can actually retrofit them back to dry, because the oil lines aren't sequential, so they work in parallel. And then it's got a box exhaust underneath it from a company in Italy called QD Exhaust. And then I wasn't a huge fan of the scrambler's swing arm, so I transplanted a S2R swing arm from a Monster S2R onto the scrambler. It's a tubular, so it better matches. And then painted the whole thing this neon orange, which is actually Ducati's MotoGP color, Ducati Corsa's racing color. And they actually paint their bikes. If you've seen them in person, they're this really lurid neon orange red color.
Yes, a lot of red in it.
But when you photograph, and that's the weird thing, is when people have only seen photos of the Hyper Scrambler, they're like, "Oh, you repainted it." I'm like,
I think it's red, yeah.
No, yeah, because that color actually translates to it looks like Ducati red when you photograph it or film it. But it's actually quite leery. It's really like bright. And also in the process managed to shave like 85 pounds off it. So we boosted the power. So it's 325 dry. It used to make 75 at the crank, and now it makes 75 at the wheel, so about 83 at the crank. But the power to weight ratio is equivalent to kind of a super bike.
Wow.
But it's really light, and it's got wide bars. It's super fun, proper hooligan machine. And I've still got the original one. And then after we'd finished it, Jay Leno had featured a motorcycle called the Musket, which was a twin Royal Enfield that a friend of mine, curiously, an industrial design friend of mine from Columbus, Ohio, had engineered. And actually, Max Hazen ended up building a motorcycle around one of those motors.
Okay.
But this musket was on Jay Leno's, and I was like, oh, I know him. And so I emailed him and said, hey, how did you get on Jay Leno? Sorry to bother you.
Right.
And he's like, oh, this other friend of mine is a friend of Jay's, and so I sort of put the feelers out, and he said, well, look, I'll show it to him if he likes it, but no promises. And they said yes, and so we went up to LA and we got to meet Jay. He has this amazing warehouse of cars and motorcycles near Burbank Airport. I mean, I think it's actually 2 aircraft hangars knocked together.
Right.
I mean, you almost can't see the end of it. You know what I mean? It's really big.
Yeah.
And Jay was such a lovely host. Because while we wheeled the bike in, the camera crew was setting up all their equipment. So Jay, I had my wife with me and a photographer friend of mine who lives in Los Angeles. And while they were setting up, he just walked us around and, described everything, and was lovely. Because we were there for an entire day, and then we had lunch with the crew, and then we went out on the road, and Jay rode it, and we filmed him riding it as well. And then actually I sent him through his production company. I sent him just a card, saying thanks. And then about a week later, he phoned me up and said, thanks for the card. Jay Leno, right? I mean, he doesn't, he's got like many more important things to do than phone up some bloke who he met once and send him a card. And I just thought, you know what, that's really classy. So it was a wonderful experience. And then actually we were supposed to take the XP we could see where the story's going. We were going to take the XP to Jay Leno's in March 2020.
Okay. Yeah. The EV world was really like on an on ramp.
Oh my God! Yeah.
COVID, right. It was like this growing storm, and
this thing was ramping, and then it just
COVID hit.
Yeah.
So it seems like everybody's trying to ramp up again. So before we have to say goodbye today, I know you're busy, and I'm busy as well. But we're gonna do more of these, I can tell, because we haven't scratched the surface of what we had on our list. But where do you think EV world is going? We had this conversation last week. The 2 big questions for me are, is it going to be a custom build led sort of process that captures people's imagination, or will the production companies find a way to give us a compelling enough narrative? Bikes are about story, right? They're about how you tap into the human psyche in a real way. So will the production guys be able to give us that story? The verdict's still out on that, and give us something that the numbers can buy and will want. There's going to be guys like you who give us these just beautiful design sculptures, rolling sculptures that push us forward to consider something aside from the politics and all that. That's irrelevant. There's going to be people on both sides of that, no matter how long EVs coming and going. So it becomes, can they get the product? So they got range, priceability, and a story, right?
Right. Yes. Go.
So who wins that? Who wins that battle? Who leads that battle?
No, I mean, I think the incumbents have got a battle on their hands against the newly emerging solely electric companies. Definitely. I think the incumbent brands that make gas bikes, they have literally the classic innovator's dilemma. They can see it coming, but they sort of don't really know what to do with it. It's an open secret. Everyone's got an EV ready to go, right? But it's a sort of Mexican standoff. It's like who blinks first. And I think it's really courageous, that Harley Davidson is, currently, but soon not to be, the only OEM that makes an electric motorcycle.
Triumph's got a big project.
Triumph's the TE1's now coming out, or threatening to.
Yeah.
But I mean, Harley like the last company you would imagine. But
Right.
no, it's an absolute innovator's dilemma. And, you know, it really is. I think it's a kind of Nokia versus iPhone moment. I really do. I think they've got to be really, really careful. You know, Nokia owned 80% of the market, and then within 5 years, they'd lost it all, essentially. And then what was it, like $80 billion of value or something disappeared in 5 years.
Yeah, it was amazing.
I think, you know, I think the one thing that the incumbents cannot do, and this is where I can help.
Right. Right.
And actually, you know, I have been doing some consulting to a number of name brands that I'm not allowed to say who,
Sure.
but
Sure.
you know, advising and strategizing with. But I think one thing they cannot do is they cannot continue to go through the same motions and expect a different result. I don't, in a way, I don't know if automotive design is the solution. I would make a case that something a little broader, like industrial design, is maybe better suited, because it really is a very different animal. And to go back to the kind of iPhone analogy, you know, I think comparing a gas bike to an electric bike is a bit like comparing a landline to an iPhone. Yeah, they both make phone calls, but the implications of one versus the implications of the other are so very different. You know, the integration of the electronics and the mechanics on an electric are, the implications of that are so far reaching. It is not, they are not the same thing. And I think it would be a real mistake to imagine they are. And so, and you can tell with the XP, like I have a bit of an issue with making electric bikes look like gas bikes. I think it, there are a number of reasons why it doesn't work. One, I think it makes people imagine that electric bikes are just like gas bikes, but with a different motor.
Right.
They are very different. They have very different characteristics. They're very different animals. Two, I think,
and in some ways, surprisingly more enjoyable. And I say that as a purist, a petrol guy. You know, it's almost heresy, but
I would
they're,
say as enjoyable in a very different way.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I mean, they're both amazing. Yeah. I mean, there's still, I jump from one to the other, and you know,
Right.
I love the Hyper Scrambler, and then I get on the XP, and I'm like, this thing is
Yeah.
crazy fast.
Yeah.
But they're very different. It's sort of like, I mean, they're just both beautiful things, you know,
Yeah.
and they've got their own attributes. So I don't think the electric can borrow attributes from gasoline. I think it's completely redundant. And then the other thing is, I'm not entirely convinced that the incumbent should be aiming for existing motorcycle riders as their audience. Again, you know, I mean, okay, it's a smaller bike, but you talk to, I think, Paul Diolinto you interviewed mentioned, you know, Sondors.
Yes.
80% of their motorcycle buyers, I mean, they're light motorcycles, but have never owned a motorcycle. They're not, you know, and this is the other thing, is there are a certain set of values attached to traditional motorcycling that are problematic. I mean, I don't think, you know, we're not going to have much of an argument there, you know, and especially problematic to new audiences and new generations. If
you're gonna reach women, which is demographic, the motorcycle industry has said they've been aiming for a long time. You know, electric will give them, if designed properly and presented, installed properly, it will give them something less intimidating, less to do, more reassurance. But got to get seat height down, you got to get weight down. Some
but
of those
to be
other
honest, that's, you know, but also, I mean, you know, motorcycling is a very small industry. I mean, it's smaller than bicycling. I mean, I think that's true of male riders, any kind of rider. I think there is a lot of intimidation. I mean, I had a very interesting, I had a kind of an epiphany insight from a client. Well, I had two actually, about the XP. One was really good. You know, they were very reassured that, like, you know, they like the fact the XP is based on Zero's mechanicals, because, you know, Zero's been around for 16 years and they are literally like the adult in the room. Although, you know, the Harleys and the Triumphs, they're big companies, they're probably not going to go anywhere either. But the other startups, questionable sometimes. But the other insight was I was talking to a client about buying an XP, and we have a number of like specials for private clients in the works. And he's a very kind of like manly man. He's a hockey player. He's missing his 4 front teeth. He's you wouldn't want to be on the wrong side in the dark alley sort of thing.
Yeah.
And he's like, look, can we just talk candidly for a second? Like the fact that the XP can, on the dyno do 0 to 60 in 1.5 seconds. In the real world, do it in like 3. It's a bit intimidating, actually. I'm not that confident with motorcycles. And I said, oh God, I realized I completely sort of misunderstood the market and almost missold it. But the great thing about the XP is you have the best of both worlds, right? You can have this amazing looking sort of dart of a motorcycle, but you can make it behave like a 125 or a 50cc if you want to. You can limit it to like 40 miles an hour top speed and make the power delivery.
Yeah, and the torque
nothing.
is, and no matter how powerful you are, the torque is so smooth and controllable.
Well, but then you've got all the motorcycles in that kind of experience transition in one motorcycle. Suddenly, after a year or whatever, after a couple of months, I'm like, oh, I want to, more like a 400, and then you go up to sort of 750, and then 1,000, and that's all in the same bike, which is amazing. And then not only that, I can make its characteristics change as well. So I don't want like a really reactive, hugely engine brakey motorcycle on the highway because it's constantly like this and it's really annoying. I want like something to act like a Goldwing on the highway. But then as soon as I pull off, I get into the twisties, I can literally push a button and then the thing is like a B-twin.
It's amazing. That's amazing.
Which is, and the power, the power delivery changes and everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. That's one of the draws, I think. We're going to do this again. Maybe next week when we get off, we'll schedule next week. We can do this. We can do a 4-part series like that.
Oh God, I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
I know. So let's do that. But tell us where people can get in touch with you, and if they want to look at your bikes or commission a bike, how do they find you?
Yeah. So our company is called Untitled Motorcycles. We have 2 workshops, one in London and one in San Francisco. I founded and run the San Francisco one. And you can contact us at hello@untitledmotorcycles.com or go to the website untitledmotorcycles.com or Twitter or Instagram. We're probably most on Instagram. Yeah. Or me, which is Hugo Eccles.
Awesome. Hugo Eccles. Awesome designer, great bike builder. You're going to see him again soon. Thank you, Hugo. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much.
Take care. We'll see you next time. All right.
Yeah. Brilliant. Bye.